Aaron Miller is Vice President for New Initiatives and a distinguished scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center, where he's also Director of the Middle East Program. Aaron, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
John, always a pleasure.
Let me ask you about this Game of Thrones and the House of Saud. What's going on and why now? Did you see this coming?
People ask me what's new in the Middle East, and I say, I got two-word answer, Saudi Arabia. I mean, watch this region for 40 of my 60-plus years. Very little ends up being new. This is quite extraordinary. Very rarely do you see a leader, in this case a 32-year-old, the young man who would be king when King Salman, his father, either dies or abdicates early. Very rarely in this region do you see risk-ready, presumably transformative leaders who are fundamentally committed to changing the nature of their system and projecting a risk readiness abroad that has rarely characterized Saudi policy over the course of the last 60 or 70 years. But that's presumably what you have. A young man in a hurry with several goals. One, transform the Saudi economy, diversify it by 2030 in his Vision 2030. Project a much tougher role, largely against Iran, outside the kingdom, and to a large degree appeal to the middle class and to youth to modernize the country. Now, whether or not he can accomplish all of this is unclear. These weekend purges, though, represent something else. I mean, 500 arrests, and even if this is Hamlet, Lear, and Macbeth without the gore and the blood, this really is a sort of Game of Thrones. I'd argue it's Tolkien-esque in the sense that this young man, wants one ring to rule them all. He seems to be acquiring and seeking absolute power in a country that's already a police state, but one at least whose royal family has been driven largely by consensus and distribution of power, not concentration, absolute concentration of it.
He became defense minister at age 29, now 32 years old.
Yeah, and he now has coordinated control over the three key branches of the Saudi military. So it's not to mention his attacks on the media, dissidents. He's even gone after hardline clerics. So this is across the board effort to prepare the way for the ascension.
Trying to put this in some perspective that people in the U.S. can fully grasp what's happening. I saw that in a piece by our colleague Robin Wright, that she said a defense or former U.S. official told her that it's the equivalent of waking up finding Warren Buffett and the heads of ABC, NBC, CBS had all been arrested. Another way to look at it, when you use the family, this is a family affair in Saudi Arabia government. This is like President Trump waking up one day and arresting Ivanka and Jared.
Well, he's gone after some 11 royal cousins, but he's also reached outside the family, largely, I suspect, to cut down to size those who consider themselves too big and too independent under the guise of what you hastily convened anti-corruption committee. The problem with that, of course, is that this is the way all of the royals operate. There's no transparency. I mean, the guy's got a $500 million yacht. Where did he get the money to pay for that? Do you think there's a budgetary record kept that's transparent? No. So the question is, it's the pot calling the kettle black.
What does it tell us about the stability of the kingdom? In the risk-averse days, there was a certain stability. Is this a shaky kingdom now as a result?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, if the succession, whenever it occurs, when King Salman dies or abdicates early, goes smoothly, and he's eliminated all of the putative power centers, it's hard to imagine it wouldn't. Then you might see a situation in which people have no choice, at least for the moment, to accommodate themselves to the new order.
But smoothly is not guaranteed when a crown prince is making enemies.
No, that's definitely the case. But also keep in mind that the Saudis, as well as the other monarchies, survived the Arab Spring in large part intact.
Yeah.
I mean, these were not the phony full republics that went through violent transitions. And I think in large part, in the case of the Saudis, if you're an average Saudi, you're looking around in 2011, 2012, 2013, you don't want an Arab Spring in your backyard. You're looking to Syria, you're going to Iraq, Yemen, Libya, forget it. So it may well be that Saudis are prepared to accept an evolutionary approach to change. And look, the guy's done some good things, the process that will ultimately allow women to drive, for example. If in fact he's committed to a more moderate form of Islam, which means essentially stopping Saudi export of this intolerant strain of Wahhabism, paying for madrasas and imams and textbooks that are quite radical in temperament and tone, that's also a good thing. So
that all sounds like a positive agenda. Do we know enough about him to know if that's what his commitment is to this sort of modernization?
no. In fact, it may be a nod to co-opt those ultimately, and to demonstrate that this isn't repression. This isn't an effort to become the supreme leader. You see, I really am interested in modernizing and opening up the system. Remains to be seen. One additional point, though, is worth making. That guy's 32. He could rule the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, assuming it survives as a coherent polity, for 50 years.
No.
Never seen anything quite like this. Never.
No. And President Trump has expressed support for this purge and for this leadership. You have a new piece coming out in Foreign Policy where you describe this as a high wire act on the part of both the Saudis and President Trump, placing his bets on this young
I mean, the
prince.
Saudis offered the president. I mean, think about it. Our last 4 presidents took their first foreign trip either to Canada or Mexico. Here you got a guy who went to Saudi Arabia. And why? Because I think he feels a certain affinity. There's money, there's an authoritarian streak, clearly. There's stability, there's strength, and it's an effort to distance himself from his predecessor and to improve the U.S.-Saudi relationship, one that Obama, in his effort to cut a deal with the Iranians on the nuclear accord, seemed to have strained. So the problem is that you can support some of this stuff without providing King Salman and the young son with a virtual blank check. And that, I think, is what we've done. We've identified now with this protracted, catastrophic campaign in Yemen. The president has come out publicly to back the Saudis against the Qataris. We've said very little about human rights. He's endorsed the purges by basically saying that the king and his son know exactly what they're doing. I'm not sure any 32-year-old knows that.
More or less.
Right, exactly. And the fat cats
How he would know that
deserved it anyway.
Right.
So I wonder, and he sits above it all, oblivious to the sorts of decisions that are being made. And remember, John, we've had a love affair with Saudi Arabia for decades. I mean, ever since FDR decided on his way back from Yalta to see Abdulaziz, the founder of the kingdom, at the Great Bitter Lake, and Roosevelt was literally impressed by all the pageantry and the allure and mystery of the desert. I'm not so sure the president delves that deeply into these matters, but they want to flatter him. They want to please him. They gave him the collar of Abdulaziz Al Saud, the highest honor. They also gave it to George W. Bush and to Obama. I think it is appropriate, though, that they gave him the collar, because I think that's exactly what the Saudis have done. They've managed to collar us in pursuit of some of their objectives, which frankly undermine our credibility and our image.
A final thought is on the regional mix and how this shakes up the power structure within the region. I'm probably too early to tell, so forgive me for asking for speculation, but how do the other regional players view this change in the character of Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think it's got to be seen against the backdrop of a Iranian-Saudi Cold War. And as a part of this Shakespearean play, you also have the extraordinary issue of a Lebanese prime minister, Saad Hariri, he's also a Saudi citizen, resigning his job in Saudi Arabia, having it broadcast over a Saudi medium, probably under pressure from the Saudis, in an effort to, again, strip away the cover that, in fact, Lebanon is being governed by a confessionally balanced coalition to expose the Shia, Hezbollah, and Iran for controlling the country. That could easily lead Lebanon to political crisis, or worse, if it sets the stage for an Israeli-Hezbollah confrontation, which people have rightly fear and worry about.
Aaron, thank you, as always. We'll look forward to your commentary and your appearances on this issue. I should tell our viewers that if you go to the Wilson Center website, and you'll find a ground truth briefing that Aaron is moderating later today. It'll be time travel. By the time you see this, that will have happened, but you can listen to that podcast. Aaron, thanks for joining us.
John, thanks. You're a great interviewer.
I appreciate it.